welcome. In this segment, you are going to learn how to identify and count carbohydrates to help you better manage your diabetes and your blood sugar overall. Many physicians and dietitians keep stressing how important it is to count carbohydrates to help us successfully manage diabetes. But why is carbohydrate counting so important? Carbohydrates, or carbs, have the greatest effect on blood sugar. 90 to 100% of the carbs we eat appear in our bloodstream as glucose or blood sugar within minutes to hours after we have eaten. By eating the right amount of carbs at each meal, we can control how much our blood sugar goes up and avoid uncontrolled spikes. Counting carbs can also help you control calories and lose weight if that is something you might be interested in doing. Before you begin counting carbohydrates, it is very important to identify what carbohydrates are and be able to detect which foods affect your blood sugar levels. Carbs are not all the same. They cover many different foods. We can split them into two groups, simple and complex carbs. The simple carbohydrates are refined and very processed. They include many junk foods like pizza, donuts, cookies, soda, fruit juices, and other sweetened drinks, candies, syrups, sugars, and more. It is recommended that you avoid these type of foods whether you have diabetes or not. Simple carbs in general are calorically rich but nutritionally poor and have virtually no fiber. The complex carbs are things like whole grains, fruits, starchy vegetables like potatoes, peas, squashes, and also beans and legumes. These foods are generally lower in calories, but they are rich in nutrients and they are a great source of fiber and even protein. It is suggested that we include them in our well-balanced diet and consume them daily. Of course, a diabetic would need to keep track of how much of them they're eating since they're still carbohydrates. The biggest difference between the simple and the complex carbohydrates is that simple carbs are refined, highly processed, and contain little or no fiber. Complex carbs, on the other hand, are often rich in fiber and are whole foods, which means they're closer to their natural form. The following food groups and food components are all considered carbohydrates and will raise your blood sugar level to a certain degree. This is why you should be paying close attention to them. Grains, things like bread, cereal, rice, pasta, oats, crackers, pretzels, popcorn. Starchy vegetables such as potatoes, peas, and corn. Dried beans, lentils, and legumes. All types of fruit and fruit juices and soda. Milk, yogurt, ice cream, and other dairy creams. Sugar, candy and sweets, candy, cakes, pies, cookies, and donuts. It is important to remember that even though they're all classified as carbs, they all have different amount of carbohydrates. Where do you find the information about the amount? It is on the nutrition facts label. You can also find a list of some of the most common carbohydrates and their portions and carb amounts in the supplemental materials of the course. It is important to keep this information on hand at least until you get used to these portions. In these three categories, we have the non-carbohydrate foods that don't affect our blood sugar levels. Proteins, these are things like meat, chicken, pork, turkey, fish, eggs, cheese, plant-based options such as tofu and tempeh, nuts and nut butters. The next column is fats, oils, butters, margarine, mayonnaise, seeds, some nuts and nut butters. As you can see, some of these items fall in two categories. Then we have non-starchy vegetables. There is a wide variety of leafy greens, broccoli, cauliflower, green beans, tomatoes, carrots, celery, radish, onions, peppers, asparagus, eggplant, artichoke, etc. Now that we have identified the carbohydrates, let's look at some examples on how to count them. There are two ways to count carbohydrates. You can count them by servings, also called carbohydrate choices, and you can count them by grams. One serving or one carbohydrate choice is measured as 15 grams. An easier way to compare these two types of counting is the way we count time. We could say 60 minutes, or we could also say 1 hour. By the same token, we could say one serving or 1 carbohydrate choice, or we can also say 15 grams of carbohydrates. So, how much is 15 grams of carbohydrates in different types of food we eat? It depends on the food. For example, 1 slice of bread, a small apple, or a small ear of corn all have about 15 grams of carbs. So, each one of these items will be 1 serving or 1 carbohydrate choice. All of these foods look different, but this specific amount is the same 1 serving or 1 choice of carbohydrate, which equals 15 grams of total carb. Even though these foods look very different, because they all contain about the same amount of carbohydrate, they will all affect your blood sugar about the same way. Let's say that you are particularly hungry and decide to consume all these 3 different choices together. In that case, you will be consuming 3 servings of carbohydrate or 3 carbohydrate choices. And if you're using the measurements in grams, you would be counting 3 times 15 grams, which is 45 grams in total. If you're trying to convert the numbers, you can always use this little chart. Think of it as counting by 15s. And remember that a serving of carb or the carb choice is not the same thing as the serving size you would see on nutrition facts label. All carbohydrates on the label are measured in grams. So how many servings of carbohydrate are you supposed to eat at each meal? Let's look at the recommendation and what might be the appropriate carbohydrate amount for you. The amount would be different for diabetic women than for diabetic men. For diabetic women, the recommended amount is 2 to 3 carbohydrate servings or choices per meal, which is 30 to 45 grams of carbohydrate per meal. For those women who are trying to lose weight, it is recommended to stay closer to the 2 servings per meal or 30 grams of carbohydrates. It is also recommended that diabetic women consume 3 balanced meals per day, allowing a snack if needed. A snack should be 1 serving or choice or less, which is 15 grams of carbohydrates or less. Now let's look at the recommendations for men. The general recommendation is a little bit higher. Per meal, it would be 3 to 4 servings or carbohydrate choices, which is 45 to 60 grams of carbohydrate. If the diabetic man desires to lose weight, the recommendation would be to stick to the lower number, which is 3 servings or choices, which is total of 45 grams of carbohydrate. It is also recommended that men also consume 3 balanced meals per day, allowing them 1 snack of 1 serving, 15 grams or less of carbohydrate. It is important to have the carbs spread throughout the day and divided between those 3 meals. Sometimes you might think if you don't eat carbs all day, you can save them all and have a whole pizza for dinner. That will cause a very high spike in your blood sugar, and it is not a good idea. It is recommended that you stick to the same number of carbohydrates every day. Our bodies thrive on routine and consistency. So in this case, it would be a good idea to avoid the carbohydrate roller coaster. You don't have to eat the same foods every day, just the same amount of carbs. With a little bit of practice and education, this can be an easy process. An easy way to remember your meal limits for carbohydrates is to think of it as lunch money concept. Imagine that for every meal of the day, you are given lunch money. If you're a woman, you get no more than 45. And if you are a man, you get no more than 60. So when you are looking at the menu and your food choices, keep in mind that it is all carb money and you can spend it, but not all of it. You don't have to spend all of your money, but you have to make sure that you stay under the number 45 or 60. Now let's take a look at what those numbers might look like in a meal. Here we see 2 examples of 2 different breakfast options. They are different in quantities and flavors, but when put together, the number of carbohydrates is pretty close to the same. Remember, you don't have to eat the same foods, but you do have to stick to the same numbers. Now let's look at some examples of carbohydrate amounts in heavy carb foods. 1 cup of cooked pasta or rice is about 45 grams of carbohydrate. Whole English muffin about 30 grams. 1 medium potato about 30 grams, and so on. Do you need to memorize all of these? Nope. These numbers are located on the nutrition facts label, but you will have to measure with spoons, measuring cups, until you get used to eyeballing the correct amounts. To be able to successfully count your carbohydrates, you will need to familiarize yourself with the nutrition facts label. We have a very detailed video segment on nutrition labels that will help you understand it. For this segment, we will look at a few examples and we will focus solely on carbohydrates. If you have another condition, such as hypertension or kidney disease, there are other areas of the nutrition facts label that you would like to pay attention to, but for diabetes, we would only look at carbohydrates. You will also need to pay close attention to the serving size and servings per container, especially if you're planning to eat the whole content of the container. For the next example, we're not going to worry about calories, fats, or sodium. However, these are some of the numbers that you will need to pay attention to when you're shopping, especially if you have another condition or you're trying to lose weight. When you look at a nutrition facts label, you want to take a look at the serving size. The serving size is not a suggestion or a recommendation on how much to eat. It is the amount that is usually eaten on average. The serving size tells you how much is considered one serving of this food. Next, look at the amount of servings per container. This tells you how many servings are in the package. Next, look at the total carbohydrates. This tells you how many grams of carbohydrate is in the serving size listed above. You don't need to worry about counting the sugar. This number is already included in the total carbohydrate number. Don't pay attention to the percentages of daily values. This gives us information how much percentage is in the food from the daily recommendation. With diabetes, your numbers and recommendations for carbohydrates will be different than the average population, so this percentage does not apply to you. Let's practice some label reading. Let's check out this ice cream label and practice. What is the serving size? The serving size in this example is 2/3 of a cup. How many servings are in the entire container? There are 3 servings in this container, which means that if you eat the whole tub of ice cream, you would have to multiply the number of the label by 3. How many carbohydrates are in one serving? There are 33 grams of carbohydrates in one serving, so if you eat the whole tub, you will end up consuming about 99 grams of carbohydrate, which is way too much for both men and women. Should you eliminate ice cream entirely from your diet? Not necessarily, but you will need to schedule these treats and account for them in the daily meal plan. Stick to your goal and servings and do appropriate portioning. As we mentioned earlier, there are tools to make it easier for you to count carbohydrates: liquid measuring cup, dry measuring cup, measuring spoons, and food scale. If you don't have any of these tools available, you can also use estimates by using your hands. 1 cup is about the size of your fist, so if you're serving yourself pasta, beans, rice, or mashed potatoes, the size of your fist should be approximately 1 cup. For protein, the recommendation is about 3 ounces per meal, which is about the palm of your hand without counting the fingers. For fats and dressings, the amount would be about 1 ounce or a tablespoon, which you could measure with the size of your thumb. We don't need a measurement for non-starchy vegetables because they're free and we can eat as much as we would like. It is important to measure your food so you know how much you're consuming. After a while, you will be able to correctly estimate your portions. What about sugar? Some of the names of sugar that you might find on the ingredients list on the package include total sugar, raw sugar, brown sugar, molasses, honey, agave nectar, maple syrup, pancake syrup, high fructose corn syrup, beet or cane sugar, sucrose, fructose, and more. All of these will affect your blood sugar level. They're to be avoided or completely eliminated. They bring absolutely no nutritional benefit aside from carbohydrates and calories. There are much better options. Now let's look at the sugar alcohols. They can be identified by their word ending OL: sorbitol, xylitol, glycol, glycerol, mannitol, and more. These do not typically raise blood sugar and are more of a sugar substitute. They're often found in sugar-free products. Be careful not to overdo it with sugar-free products and sweeteners. They can cause stomach upset in some individuals or if eaten in excess. They are typically harmless and will not damage your body, but in some people with more sensitive stomachs, they can cause severe bloating. So, by now, you might have come to the conclusion that sugar is not that good for you, but you still have a sweet tooth. So what do? What can you use instead of sugar? The first option would always be to choose nature's candy, which are the delicious and colorful fruits. Dates in particular are very sweet and used to substitute sugar in many baking recipes. But you can use also artificial sweeteners, also called sugar substitutes, as an alternative to sugar to add sweetness to your food. They will not raise your blood sugar. Of course, they're processed and not natural, which is why you don't want to overdo it, but they can really do the trick when you're craving the sugar your body was used to. You can use sugar substitutes such as monk fruit sweetener and erythritol. Erythritol is a sugar alcohol, while monk fruit comes from an Asian fruit. Both are non-nutritive, zero-calorie sweeteners. You can also use Splenda, Equal, Sweet and Low, Stevia, or Nectris. From the list, the preferable ones are monk fruit sweetener and erythritol. They are the closest to sugar, do not have funky aftertaste, and do not cause bloating or gas. The rest of them will not harm you. However, some people may be sensitive to them and may experience a little bit of bloating or extra gas. Choose the one you like. What makes these artificial sweeteners so sweet? They're very similar to sugar, but in their composition, they have an extra molecule that does not allow us to break them down all the way. Therefore, they are not digested, or they're digested differently than sugar. At first, all of this might seem too much and too intense. There are so many things you have to do: reading labels, counting carbohydrates, using measuring tools, portioning your food, packing your lunches, making your meal plans, trying new recipes, and more. At first, it will take a little longer, especially reading the nutrition label and finding the new products. But after a little practice, you will get much faster at it, and it will become like a second nature to you. When you get discouraged, remember your goal and know there is help available. If you need assistance and support, please reach out to your nutritionist or a wellness coach. Mahalo and aloha.